webinar. But for those of you who are not familiar with it yet, we're going to cover some of the basic information about the overall IELTS in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So, you know, people take IELTS for different reasons to help them achieve their goals. Some people, you know, may be taking it for higher education opportunities. Some people might be taking it for employment purposes, or, for example, if you're wanting to work in an international or a global company, there might be some requirements as a minimum standard of your English language level. It also might be for just to progress in your career. For example, there might be a company where if you wanted to be able to get to a management level, you would need to have, you know, a certain level of English that you would be able to have. And finally, immigration. Some people might be moving over to another country to live and work, to be with their family. So the great thing about the IELTS standardized test is this is the type of opportunity that might help you get there to achieve your goals. Just to clarify before we move on, can everyone hear me okay? Julian, can you hear me okay?
It sounds good.
Okay, great, thank you. Next slide, please. So, IELTS is globally recognized. You know, there are over 10,000 organizations in 140 different countries that recognize IELTS. There's also universities, not only in the UK, but Australia, New Zealand, and most universities in Canada, as well as, you know, several universities in the US as well that accept IELTS. Immigration authorities in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK also recognize IELTS. And finally, you know, as we mentioned before, whether it's a local or an international employer, they also accept and recognize IELTS as a standard for your level of communication in English. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the test format. When you think about IELTS, there are 4 different language skills that you are going to be tested on. And this format is tied into those. So the IELTS test, you know, as far as the features, is composed of your listening, your reading, writing, and speaking and we will be talking more specifically in depth about speaking today. One of the main differences, depending on whether or not you're going to be taking your IELTS exam for academic purposes or for the general training, is that the reading and the writing task 1 are different. Otherwise, the listening and the speaking parts for both the general as well as the academic IELTS exam are exactly the same. There is a specific amount of time set aside for each of these. As you can see,
you are on mute right now.
Please unmute you.
I'm very sorry. Was I on unmute the whole time?
A few seconds ago only.
Okay. So just to recap, I'm sorry. I'm not sure who was able to hear what I said, but there are 2 different formats, the academic and the general. The main difference between the 2 is that the reading materials will be different for general training, and the writing task 1 of the general training is different than the academic writing. Otherwise, the listening and speaking is exactly the same, and the time is the same for all of them. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. And for those of you who are not sure whether or not you are supposed to be taking an academic test or you should be taking the general, this is where you should probably check with the institution that you are going to be applying towards, or the job, if it's a job related, what they're requesting. Let's just take a quick minute here. As far as the test format, when you think about the 4 different language skills that you're going to be tested against, I want you to think about which of those do you think would be the most challenging to you. So if you can, we'll just look at a couple really quick, but if you can just go into the chat area and go ahead and put which one of those. Do you think reading is your biggest challenge? Do you think listening, writing, or speaking? Okay, please type that into the chat. All right, good. Looks like we're getting a lot of different variations. We do have some speaking. Some people say that the reading is more difficult. Writing might be challenging for others. A lot of times it depends on, how much time you have been exposed to each of these different type of language skills. For example, for many of you, if you don't have the opportunity to use the language outside of the classroom, or for those of you who might be fortunate enough to be working in an English language focus, speaking might be challenging. For some other people, maybe it's reading. You don't really enjoy reading, and you're being asked to take an exam that has to do with academic reading. So if you haven't already, we do have webinars on the other different type of skills, so I would encourage you to also join those if you haven't yet, just to kind of get an idea of maybe some tips that you could use. All right, good. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're coming to the test day. And so what is the kinds of things that we're going to be able to expect on test day? Next slide. So something to point out before we go into some of these specifics is, right now we know that testing is currently on hold in Nepal due to the pandemic and the current lockdown. We do not have any specific times as to when those are going to continue or pick up again, but obviously that is something to keep in mind. In addition, as far as the procedures for speaking test day, I think it's really important to know that British Council takes the health and safety of the candidates as well as their staff very, very seriously. So due to this pandemic, and across British Council as a whole across the world, there are currently procedures in place to make sure that we are adhering to the policies and procedures recommended by WHO. One of the things that has already changed when it talks about the procedures is, for those of you who are taking the test outside of Kathmandu, the speaking is currently done by video call, speaking exams. In Kathmandu, there is the opportunity to go in to the actual British Council, but at this time, that is currently on hold. So I would just check for the latest requirements whenever you sign up for the exam. But in an overall general standpoint, I would tell you that with the speaking day procedures, when you arrive at the test venue, and so for example here it might be in Lions Shore, unless it's at a designated other venue, you're going to need to check your details during direct registration. Do not forget to bring your ID. You want to use that that you registered for the exam. Once a photo registration and finger scan has done, then you're going to be able to enter the test room, and the speaking test will begin. And then at the end of the session, you're going to be dismissed, and you would wait for the release of your results. Usually that's typically about 14 days. All right, can you please, next slide, please. Okay, so if there aren't any questions right now, I just want to, the next part of this, we're going to be going into some practice for the speaking test and what's going to happen on the exam day. So, next slide. Okay, so one of the things that's important to remember when you are taking this speaking exam is that this is your chance to show an examiner your ability to communicate in English, how well you speak. All right? Because at the end of the day, the reason you are taking this exam is to be able to determine, can you function in an English-speaking country where the English language is being used, whether it's for academic purposes or for work purposes. So this is not a pass or fail type of an exam. This is an assessment of how well you can use and understand the language. So when you are doing the speaking test interview, overall, the timing is about 13 to 14 minutes. The examiner has to be careful to be able to stick to the time for the whole test. And in individual parts of the test, there is a certain time allotted. So please know that when you do go in for the speaking test, just like you go in for the listening and the writing and the reading, it is time sensitive. So you need to be aware of that. How are the questions that the interviewer or the examiner asks you determined? There are questions that are coming from booklets that are pre-selected by the examiner prior to you going into your. The examiner is going to read you exactly what is on that page. So there is, especially for part 1 and part 2, obviously, this is going to be a script. It's going to be read exactly what is on the page. Something to note for you guys is that each test is recorded, and it also may be assessed by a second examiner. So from the time you walk into the room, to the time that you finish your test and walk out the door, every part of that is recorded. So what is your job as far as a candidate? What is your job when you go in and you do this exam? Well, it's not just to answer the questions correctly. To be honest, there's really no right or wrong answer as long as you stick to the topic or you are on topic. What your job is to do is to show how well you can communicate when you speak in English. So this means that you need to be able to answer those questions as fully as you can. And, short answers, this is something that you need to be really conscientious about. Short answers, even if they're correct, aren't going to show the examiner how well you can speak in English. So the more that you extend, that's going to be really important when you're thinking about your scores. So there's 3 parts to the test. As I said, the test overall is about 13 to 14 minutes, roughly. So part 1 is 4 to 5 minutes of that. And this part is where you're going to be, the examiner is going to be more interviewing you. Think of it, questions are going to be on topics that are familiar to you. It could be talking about your studies, your work, where do you live, what do you like to do in your free time, you know, your haircut. It could even be celebrations. This should be an area that you should be very familiar with because, again, it's on topics that are personal to you. In the second part, this is what we call the long turn, and this is 4 minutes. This is where you're going to actually be given a topic, a card that has a specific topic on it, and you will have 1 minute to prepare what you're going to say about this topic, and then you'll have up to 2 minutes that you're going to need to talk on this topic. And part 3 is 5 minutes, roughly 5 minutes. And part 3 is more, it's more abstract, and it's going to be general questions that are related to the question that you have received in part 2. So, for example, if in part 2 you were talking about your favorite teacher, part 3 might be more general questions where you're talking about education, and you're asked to give your opinion on, you know, for example, maybe the education system in Nepal. Next slide, please. So when we have the exam, and just like in the writing, there is criteria that the examiner will be assessing your speaking on. So the 4 things that we as an examiners are looking for in these speaking is fluency and coherence. And what we mean by this is, are you able to speak, you know, continuously, give extended or longer answers, and also to be able to connect what you are saying so it flows smoothly. Another part is the lexical resource, and this is basically vocabulary, and making sure that you are choosing the right words and phrases that you're going to speak about when you're asked about different topics. This is where things like synonyms, you know, less common words or vocabulary, as well as idioms that might be commonly used in the English language, are good to be able to utilize. The third thing is the grammar, and this is where we're going to be listening for, do you have the ability to combine simple and complex grammar without making mistakes. No one's perfect. I'm not saying that we can't make mistakes. I certainly don't speak perfect English, but again, the important thing to remember is, you know, if you're continually making mistakes, then obviously that might hurt your band score. And the fourth one what we look at is the pronunciation. And this is where, do you speak clearly? Is it easy for the examiner to understand you, or do they really have to strain to make sure they understand you? What about your intonation or your sounds? I'm sorry, can somebody please turn off your, please mute? Sorry, going back to when we think about the pronunciation. One thing you also want to make sure is that you don't sound like a robot. Hi, my name is Angela, and I am from the U.S. I love to, because that's not how we talk. So with the pronunciation, this is really talking about, you know, again, would I want to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and continue this conversation? So the things that you are evaluated on, there is a standardized band scores from 1 to 9 for each of these. All right, so for example, a band score 1 would essentially be somebody who is a non-user and really has no ability to utilize the language. all the way up to an expert user, a band 9, which means they have full command of the language. They use it appropriately and accurately. Most people, if some people ask, what is the average? If you think about a band 6, this is a competent user. These are people that, generally have effective command of the language. Yes, there might be some mistakes and things that are misunderstood, but obviously they can use the language and are able to be understood fairly well. Next slide, please. So again, you can download from the internet. You can just type in IELTS IELTS speaking, public band descriptors. You can also do this for the writing as well. And this will give you the opportunity to look at the different parts that you will be assessed on for the criteria, and also the things that will get you from, for example, a band 6 to a band 7. So if we were just focusing, as an example, on fluency and coherence, some things that are important when you think about the fluency and how well it flows as it organized is, again, the ability to speak without long pauses. So there's nothing wrong with natural pauses in our speech. We do that a lot. But if it's an obvious extended long pause, you want to try to avoid those. Also, just being able to speak for an extended period of time in a clear way. And do you have words and phrases that connect different things? Things you're saying like such as, like, these are words that we use to connect to give examples. If we use words like because, these are words we use to give reasons. So those are types of the words and the connectors that we use that will also help bring your scores up, your ability to use them and use them correctly. And finally, being able to make sure that you're not repeating yourself, the same thing, saying it over and over again, because you can't think about, you don't have the ability to extend. Also with correcting yourself while you're speaking. There's nothing wrong with self-correcting, but it has its limitations. So you have to be careful about when you are correcting yourself. Just make sure that it's not constantly correcting, because again, the less you correct, the higher your band scores are going to be. Next slide, please. Okay. Before we're going to actually watch a woman doing the first 2 parts of the speaking test. And as you guys watch this, I want you to think about specifically fluency and coherence. How she is speaking. Which things, if we look at this list of things that we talk about that are being assessed by the examiner, such as pauses, the length, is it organized? I want you to listen and think about which things do you think she does well. So, Julian, can you please play the recording? There you go. There's no audio.
We are not hearing sound.
I think there is no audio. Can you please check it out?
It is not audible to us.
Is the sound not audible, Angela?
I heard it at first, but I did not hear it now. I think you have to share audio.
Yeah, I did that. Let me do it again.
Julian?
Yes, Angela, Julian is looking on it right now.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. I know that Julian's working on it.
Good morning. My name is Judith Harvey. Can you tell me your full name, please?
My name is Razia Bilici.
Thank you. And can you tell me where you're from, Razia?
I'm from Turkey.
Can I see your identification, please? Thank you. That's fine. Now, in this first part, I'd like to ask you some questions about yourself. Let's talk about what you do. Do you work or are you a student?
I'm a nurse.
And why did you choose this kind of work?
I have two reasons for that. First, I'm from Turkey. In Turkey, you have to pass the very difficult exam if you like to go to the university. And I get mark for just nursing, I think. And the second one, from my childhood, I always be like doctor or nurse and to help other people. So I really like that, which is my mom always contrasts because she wants to be a teacher like my sisters.
What kind of work would you like to do in the future?
I don't know system in England very well, but maybe nursing advisor or some management job. I don't know exactly.
Now let's talk about weekends. What do you usually do at the weekend?
At the moment, my weekends are very busy because I do a lot of housework and I have a 2.5 years daughter. She's a very exciting and energetic child, and she messes up everywhere very quickly. It's not easy to tidy up and do it well.
What do you think you'll do next weekend?
I planned something for last week, but I couldn't do it. I'd like to bring my husband to the cinema, and after cinema maybe we'll go to the Turkish restaurant in St. Ives.
Do you enjoy your weekends now more than you did when you were a child?
No, I prefer to be a child again because when you are a child, you just play and you haven't got any responsibility or job to do, but now it's so different and difficult.
How important is it for you to relax at the end of the week?
It's very important, but at the moment it's not possible because now I'm studying English as well. Is when you start a job or study, you would like to be fresh, but it's really difficult to be.
Now let's talk about music. What sort of music do you usually enjoy listening to?
I'm not fan of music a lot, but I usually listen to Turkish music, and the classic Turkish music is get me relaxed. And
has the kind of music you like changed over the years?
Maybe pop music, Turkish pop music, probably. Yeah.
Do you prefer listening to live music or recorded music?
It depends on the kind of music. In Turkey, I prefer live music, but in England, I have to listen to tape music.
Do you think listening to music helps you study?
Probably not, but I do a lot. It's okay with the physics or maths or something like that, but for the literacy or something you have to be focused on it, it's not.
Now, I'm going to give you a topic, and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. You can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
Yes.
Here's some paper and a pencil for making notes. And here's your topic. I'd like you to describe a special gift or present you gave to someone. All right. Remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Yes, the special gifts I give it to someone, it was to my, I gave it to my English teacher last year. She is a fan of Turkey and Turkish culture. I gave to her some special glass, which is we just use for the Turkish tea. And she loves Turkish tea, and my last holiday, I bring some special like a golden Turkish glasses, and she really liked them. It was special because she likes Turkish culture, Turkish food, and she knows a lot about Turkey. When we are together, we can speak a lot about my culture, my religion, and stuff from Turkey or cities of Turkey. And she's great, I think, because it's really nice to know somebody from England and know about you well. And another gift, another special gift I give somebody who was my mother-in-law. And normally we don't celebrate Mother Days, and she had never had any present from her child. And in my family, we celebrate Mother Days very specially. And I bought a ring for her, and she was really exciting and sensible because the first time somebody celebrate her Mother's Day, and she even didn't know about Mother's Day, but I explained to her, and then I give her gifts, and after that I always do.
Thank you. Do you enjoy giving gifts?
Yes, I really like to give people gifts. When I saw them, they like it, they're excited about it, I feel happy.
Thank you. Can I have the booklet, paper and pencil back, please?
All right, good. So what I'd like you to do is think about, based on what you just heard in part 1 and part 2, and again, let's keep this in the chat, but think about what about the length? Were there a lot of pauses when she was talking? Was she organized? So if we can just take a minute to give a couple of your opinions. Overall, how did you think she did? As far as fluency and coherence. Okay, good. Someone said, pauses were natural. There weren't a lot of them. Yes, I would agree with that. Part one comment says part one was short. Someone said, well organized, maybe not so confident, a little bit less confidence. Good. So just to give you some overall comments, the length for part one, actually she did it without much effort. Again, this could be tied back into that it was a lot of questions related to her specifically. But yes, some are short. And she was able to speak at length in part two, but she did have to use two examples. Instead of just focusing on her teacher and the gift, she moved on to her mother-in-law. So this was because she was running out of things to say. Overall, she was organized, she had good connections, and she made sense. She was able to give reasons for many things. For example, energetic, 2-year-old just plays and has no responsibilities. These are things that you could give, for examples. Connecting words, she did use frequently, things like but, because, it depends. And repetition, she only repeats, as somebody mentions, or self-corrects once or twice. So obviously in that sense, that would get her a higher band score. Overall, she would probably, as far as a band score, probably get around a 7. She did perform well in terms of fluency, and she showed a flexible range of vocabulary. Her pronunciation was mostly clear, and she did try to mix the grammar up. So yes, there was a few mistakes, but again, probably around a 7. Next slide, please. All right, so for speaking part one, as we've mentioned before, this is something that you usually something that you are familiar with. In this example, it's talking about your hometown or your village. So it's also going to be talking about the accommodation you live in. So one thing to keep in mind is, let's do some practice. What kind of words would you use or phrases could you use to talk about? So we'll do maybe 5 minutes of this. If your first name starts with A through M, I want you to choose one of those answers from 1 through 4 and think about what would be some words or phrases that you could use to describe your hometown or village. If your first name starts with an N through a Z, I'd like you to look at those questions about accommodations that you live in. So, for example, what do you like about living there? How would you answer that? Do you think because it's great would be a good answer? Probably not. So I'm just going to give you a minute, and again, in the chat room, if your name is A through M, can you please just give an idea of maybe what words or phrases that you would use to answer those questions under what kind of place is your hometown or village? In the chat, please. So for example, if somebody said, what kind of place is it? Would you say, how would you describe it? Would you talk about the size? Good. So Ashish, it's culturally rich. It has a long heritage. You know, it's a developing city. Somebody else said that they live in an urban area, a city. So again, the key thing here is the more that you can use descriptors to describe, not only will it extend your answer, but it also gives you know, you the ability to be able to show your range of vocabulary, not just simple. Okay, so for those of you who are N through Z, let's, if we talk about the accommodation, if somebody asked you the question, if the examiner said, you know, tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in, what would be some descriptors you could use? So people from M, can you please answer, for example, where it says the accommodation? What kind of accommodation? How would you describe where you live? Right? You live in an apartment. Do you live in a large apartment? Do you live in an apartment that is on the top floor? Do you live on the bottom floor? What does that apartment have? Is it a big apartment? Small, one room, cozy? Good. Two-story detached? Yeah. So again, adjectives, using the more descriptors that you can use that are appropriate and relevant, the better, the higher your band score is going to be. All right, let's move on. This is speaking part 1. So again, this is some general questions that you should be familiar with. Next slide, please. Now, when we get into speaking part 2, again, this is where it is timed. You're going to be given a specific task to talk about, and you have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and then how would you answer it. So that you have 2 minutes to do that. You know, so something that is an idea that some of you might think about. It's hard when you have 1 minute to be able to collect all of your thoughts. So one example that you could use if you were going to be doing speaking part 2 is something we call a mind map. Essentially, that is picking out the keywords from those questions. So for example, it says, describe something you own which is important to you. So you need to talk about where you got it, how long you've had it, what you use it for, and then explain why. So in 1 minute, you don't have time to write full sentences. So you need to think about key words that are two. So as an example, under where, you want to put a couple of bullet points that might help you remember something that's important for you to use. Excuse me. You know, how long have you had it? Have you had it for 6 years? You know, you mentioned it, but you don't want to because it's so special to you. What do you use it for? Why have you kept it? And again, why is it important to you? So something called a mind map, or just giving yourself. Next slide, please. All right, so let's look at another one, but this time I want you to think about this. So just for time purposes, obviously right now we don't necessarily have enough time to do all of this. However, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you can take a picture if you want of this particular slide and practice on your own. But think about if you had 1 minute, you know, how would you describe a special event or a festival that you liked? So again, I'm going to time. I'm going to give you 1 minute. And what I'd like you to do is think about event, where, what, and why, and what bullet points that you would use. All right, so if you can have 1 minute, please begin. All right. Now that 1 minute is up. Next, the examiner would ask you if you would start talking, okay? So up to 2 minutes. For those of you who have phones, what I'd like you to do is at this point, I'd like you to record yourself. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and obviously please mute your speaker. But into your phone, I'd like you to record how you would answer this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, starting now. Speakers or phones, microphones mute, please. Speak into your phone. All right, your 2 minutes is up. For those of you who weren't able to record yourself, that's certainly okay. That's something that you can do after the webinar. And actually what I would like for all of you to do is to listen to yourself. Think about the things, if you want to just isolate the fluency and coherence, think about the things that we were assessing in the video that we listened to, and be able to give yourself some constructive feedback. And then go back and do this again and see how well you do. Maybe there's some things that you do well. Maybe there's some things that you need to work on. Raise your hand if you think that 2 minutes is a long time. Yeah, you know, not everybody, but for many people, 2 minutes is a very long time, especially if you're not used to speaking in another language for a long period of time. But that's why we practice, and that's why we encourage you as well to do that. Next slide, please. All right, so, you know, again, some of the things that we want to give you is for tips prior to the speaking test. It's going to be really important. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you need to practice. You know, people hate hearing their own voices. Well, you know, you need to get over that. You need to practice. Also, looking at different Part 1 and Part 2 questions. There are many of those that you can find online, whether or not you're taking IELTS prep classes, and also the materials that British Council has for free. There's lots of information. During the test, it's going to be very important, you know, listen to the questions. Make sure that you understand the questions. You know, again, I say that there are no right or wrong answers per se, but if you're off topic, that's not going to be good. Or if you are speaking about something in the future when the examiners asked you about something in the past. So it is very important to listen. You know, and try to answer the questions as fully as you can. Remember that the examiner wants to hear how well you can communicate in English. So if you're only giving short answers, that's going to be very hard to assess. Describing, you know, again, just in Part 2, when I asked you guys to, you know, describe your apartment, you know, using words like big and small are not really going to be showing your range of vocabulary. So the more that you can use descriptors, especially in speaking Part 1 and 2, it's going to be very important. And also just helping you to maintain that communication is going to be important. Using synonyms, right? You don't always have, make sure you're not repeating the questions that the examiner is asking you. And examples. Can't emphasize enough about examples, you know, especially, you know, talking about your own life or the people that you know. It's certainly going to be easier to remember these things that you know than trying to imagine things. But you might get a question that you're not familiar with, and you might just have to make something up. But again, the examiner is not going to question whether or not your question is true or false. Remember, they want to hear about, they want to listen to your ability to communicate in English. All right, and the next slide, please. So there are lots of test preparation resources, and British Council has lots and lots. So next slide, please. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I, for time purposes, am not going to take you through it, but I do want to I want to encourage you, A, to take a picture of this slide, and B, I believe, and Julian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we can send you a copy of this particular slide as well. But as you can see, with this particular, with all these resources, there's lots of different free resources that you can enjoy. These are things that, you know, British Council owns these, is the co-owner of IELTS. And we obviously are very committed to make sure that you're prepared for this IELTS exam. And we have a lot of free and paid resources. So please take a look at that. And again, if you want to take a picture of that slide. And also, if you are, I do want to know that once you do register for IELTS with us, you will gain access to the free 30-hour Road to IELTS, which I think is a really good tool and resource for you to use. But again, lots of different resources, so please take a picture of that. Next slide. Okay, well, that is the end of this particular IELTS Advantage session, and we want to thank you very much for joining us. Lots of good interaction here, especially when it came to how you would respond to speaking parts 1 and speaking parts 2. If anybody has any additional questions, I'm sorry we don't necessarily have time for a Q&A, but you can follow up with British Council, and they can try to answer those questions for you. So again, thank you very much for your time. Julian?
Yes, Angela.
Any questions or any comments?
No, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. Hope you've had a wonderful and a fruitful session that's beneficial for you. So thank you. And thanks to you, Angela, for running the session so smoothly. Thank you so much.